Hey guys, a couple weeks ago I had the incredible honor of sitting down with the former chief of staff of George Herbert Walker Bush. Jean Becker is the author of The Man I Knew, a book about HW, as I like to informally refer to him as. She's a lovely woman. We had a great conversation. The book is well worth a read. I've read it in Idaho last week. You won't be disappointed. You guys know that I'm a big fan of HW, and it was an incredible honor to sit down and talk to her. So here's the show.
So let's fire it up. I think I've got to start this off, Jean, by telling you that I like to tell people that I was George Herbert Walker Bush's HW is easier for me to say. His biggest fan before he was, I think, lionized in the last several years by other presidents that quite possibly couldn't fill his shoes in a wide variety of reasons. But I've been a big fan of this president, this man. I think if I could have voted for him, I wasn't of age yet. If I could have, I would have. And I really wish I could have seen, or at least I wish America could have seen a second term. So I don't want to go too gushy over the former president, but I'm a huge fan. And I think my one of the things I was thinking about this morning as I was working out and I was listening to some of your interviews, the thing that has been the question that I've always wanted to ask somebody that's been really close to him is, one of the most powerful and significant figures in American and international history. How did he manage his family? Because his family seems so tight and they seem like such good people. How did he manage his professional life and his personal life with his family? Because I see that so oftentimes that it's not done right. And it seems from the outside that they did this right. How did they do it?
Evan, that's such a great question. Nobody has asked me that question yet. And I love that you did. You know, President Bush always said that the mantra he lived by was faith, family, and friends, that they were the most important things to him. And even when he was president, he never, ever forgot that. And he held his family very close. He made time for them when he was in the White House. They would all gather at Camp David. They would all gather in Kennebunkport in the summertime. His son Marvin and his daughter Doro and their kids lived in Washington and were at the White House a lot. And that was of great comfort to him. But one of the things he did, Evan, and actually about 25 years ago, we, instead of writing a memoir, we issued a book of letters that he wrote. He was an unbelievable letter writer. He's such a great writer, period. But even at his busiest times, he would write the most amazing letters to his kids and to his grandkids. And I put some of those letters in this book, The Man I Knew, because they were just worth repeating. Right. But the name of the letters book is All Best, and it really is his autobiography. We were able to tell his life story because the letters begin with all the letters he wrote his mom during World War II.
Wow.
He started writing these letters at age 18 when he went into the Navy. And so I would say that by writing these letters, even when they weren't in the same city, he knew how to stay in touch with them. And then, of course, later emails. Right. He loved. So, but he was a great family man. He was definitely the patriarch of this great family.
It's interesting because as a patriarch of the family, and I think he was, at least from what I can gather, and you can answer kind of in the best way that we can, but he seemed like such a warm and funny person that it never quite came through it sometimes in the administration. I don't, it's hard during press conferences and things like that, but it seemed like the image of him was really contradictory to actually who he was. And I think, did you see that, I guess, as far as the development of his personality, not personality, but outside persona, that people started to actually understand who he was later, not necessarily during the administration? And do you think that's just common for presidents to be misrepresented or?
No, I think it's common of the greatest generation. Right. Because I'll tell you somebody who's exactly like him is Senator Bob Dole. Senator Dole became famous, is still famous, he's still with us, for speaking in the third person. He would refer to himself in the third person. It's really hard for the greatest generation, for that generation. They were taught to be modest. They were taught to be humble. President Bush talks a lot about his mom and all of her do's and don'ts. And certainly one of them was, do not brag about yourself. And for those of us who followed, I'm a baby boomer, and we get all sorts of bad strikes against us. But for all the generations that followed the greatest generation, and then you go into millennials and Xers and social media, and we've become sort of narcissistic, I think. And I know one of the frustrations of President Bush's campaign teams is how he wasn't willing to, for example, to talk about being shot down during World War II. He wasn't willing to talk about the fact that he and Mrs. Bush lost a daughter to leukemia. He thought he should talk about issues and policy and not make it personal. So one of the reasons I wrote the book, Evan, is because I wanted America to really get to know the man. I mean, it's why I literally called the book The Man I Knew. He was so funny and so personal and had such a big heart. And I don't blame the media for missing that story. I blame him. And there's a couple of journalists. I actually just heard from one the other day, Greta Van Susteren, my Jamie Gangel, who's now at CNN, who interviewed him quite a bit over the years, and they really loved him and they respected him. But Greta emailed me the other day and said he was the worst interview ever because you could never get him to open up and be personal. So that's why I wrote the book, just so people could see that amazing personal side of him.
And he's always, I think, from my perspective, when I've been doing, a lot of research, I guess, throughout the years, just based on personal interest, because I'm really interested in leadership and management and how to live a fulfilling life. And he was one of the people that I really focused in on. And it wasn't until after his administration that I focused in on. I said, wow, this guy really had a lot of things, I think, figured out when you think about family and friends and faith and focusing on. He wasn't necessarily, from the outsider's perspective, he wasn't consumed with trying to be a leader. He was just a leader. And I think...
Well, you really had him figured out, Evan. You got him, you were ahead of your time. You really figured him out and who he was. I love that. I really love that. And I interrupted you and I feel bad about that, but I just had to say, I love how you had him figured out. And another reason why I wrote the book, and actually it sort of occurred to me while I was writing the book, you talked about looking for examples on how to live life. I realized as I was writing this book, he left us a blueprint on how to live a good life. When people die, they'll sometimes say, oh, what a life well lived. Well, that was said about him 2.0. Yes. And really, he left us a blueprint on how to do that by example. He certainly led by example. But in the book, there's a number of letters and memos, and there's a great, great list of 10 pieces of advice for young people. Someone asked him, if you want to give young people advice today on life, what would you say? Oh my gosh, I love that list. It's 10 short pieces of advice. And as I've been saying in my interviews, if everybody would follow those 10 pieces of advice, we would be a better society.
I've always kind of looked at this in from that perspective, because of the way that, and where I kind of caught it was the way that George Bush would interact. Like, that's where it started to kind of get this, open up the door, because he was way more personal on camera. Obviously, he would open up in interviews, and the things that he would talk about his dad, and the way that he would talk about with such reverence, such respect as to who the man was. And then obviously with other children that went into politics and they're giving so much back to America on a regular basis. It was interesting to me that this man could do that. And one of the thoughts that I had was, who were his influences? How did he template or develop that? And if you had any insight into, was it Prescott? Was it his father? Was it his mother?
Yeah.
So it was Prescott. How did he talk about Prescott? If you can talk about that, like, how did he talk about his mother and father?
And there's not I will warn you, there's not a lot of that in this book, because my book really focuses on his post-presidency. There's certainly a lot of that in the letters book, All the Best. So Prescott Bush was a Wall Street businessman, went on to become a U.S. Senator from Connecticut. And he talked very openly. He died fairly young. He died in his 70s of cancer. But what President Bush talked about his dad, he had a servant's heart, which is what, of course, President Bush had. His dad was one of the founders of the USO, for example. And President Bush wrote in a letter that his dad would take the long train ride home from New York City to Greenwich, Connecticut. And he was, I think it was the town, I can't remember what it was called in Greenwich, Connecticut, but he was basically head of the town council. And President Bush said, instead of sitting home and having a martini and reading the newspaper, which he really wanted to do, there were many nights that he had to go to a town meeting and hear people complain about garbage pickup. Right. But he said that he learned a lot from watching his dad give back to the community, and then to get into the game and run for the U.S. Senate. His dad got into some controversy. He was very anti-Joe McCarthy. He thought Joe McCarthy was sort of a nut and very strong against him when that wasn't a popular thing to do. And I think President Bush learned a lot from watching his dad do, this is going to sound so simple, but sometimes we forget this, that his dad did what he thought was right. Not always what maybe was politically popular, but just what was right. His mom, on the other hand, was the one who taught him not to be a braggadocio. That was one of her favorite terms. President Bush would quote her saying that. She one time called him when he was president and chewed him out because she was watching him on TV. And he was walking in front of Mrs. Bush. And his mom called him and said, "George, do not walk in front of Barbara. That's so rude." Well, he's the president of the United States, So his mom is the one, I think, where he learned just good old-fashioned courtesy, common sense, good manners. And I think a lot of the 10 rules that he wrote for young people, which if we have time, I would love to read them.
I would love to hear those. I would absolutely love to.
Can I read them? Should I read them right now? They're just priceless. And even though, and he wrote them for kids, but yeah, we all need to pay attention to these. Okay. Here they are. Number 1, don't get down when your life takes a bad turn. Out of adversity comes challenge and often success. Number 2, don't blame others for your setbacks. Number 3, when things go well, always give credit to others. Number 4, don't talk all the time. I love that one. Listen to your friends and mentors and learn from others. Number 5, don't brag about yourself. Let others point out your virtues and your strong points. Number 6, give someone else a hand. When a friend is hurting, show that friend that you care. Number 7, nobody likes an overbearing big shot. Number 8, as you succeed, be kind to people. Thank those who help you along the way. Number 9, don't be afraid to shed a tear when your heart is broken because a friend is hurting. Number 10, say your prayers.
Oh, that's gold. That is absolute gold.
It's just classic. Yeah. It's classic. And, his very first point, out of adversity, don't get down when things don't go well. Out of adversity can come success. This is a man, Evan, who had a lot of speed bumps in life. Shot down when he was 20 years old in World War II. Both of his crew members died. It's a very life-defining, obviously, moment for him. He and Mrs. Bush lost their daughter to leukemia. He had a couple of ups and downs in politics, the biggest one, of course, being losing the election in 1992. Yeah. And he ended his life in a wheelchair. He had Parkinson's disease, and that was really hard. And I watched his resiliency on those last two, losing the election and going into the wheelchair, and just watching him deal with those. I know I'm a better person. Right. From watching him, was he sad? Absolutely. Did he have to do a little bit of what I call licking his wounds? Yes. And then he decided, okay, let's move on. Life is short, and life is meant to be lived with joy and purpose, and let's just move on. And what a great life lesson.
Yeah. When did he find out that he had Parkinson's? When did that diagnosis? What year was that?
He probably, and I actually marked something that I thought your viewers in particular might enjoy. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's probably 2009, 2010, I think. I wrote an email. I think you have a lot of hunters who probably watch you. I wrote this email to my sisters in November 2007. It's very short. This is the last chapter called The Long Journey Home. And it's about his aging, about his Parkinson's, and about his funeral. And I wrote this I've been talking about how we've been noticing that he was slowing down. He had not been diagnosed with Parkinson's yet, but he was walking with a limp. He had really slowed down a lot. I emailed my sisters in November 2007 that although President Bush's body was 83, his spirit was 65, and that sometimes was problematic. Today, he is going hunting, the first trip of the season. He's so unstable on his feet, and he confessed to me that he's slightly afraid of getting shot. He says, if you wobble out there, Jean, you might fall in the path of another hunter. He was dead serious, and yet he has no intention of not going. He just sort of said it matter of fact. I might get shot today, Jean. Well, okay, then. These Texans are weird. That's what I wrote. That's what I wrote to my sisters. But, Evan, do I think he was crazy to go hunting when he admitted to me that he might fall down? But he wasn't going to stop. He wanted to go hunting. He loved hunting. And he hunted until he absolutely couldn't anymore. But that was just that whole email. The reason I put it in is because it's so part of who he is, where he just matter-of-factly said to me, yeah, I might get shot today, Jean. And I'm like, okay. Sure.
So this is a good segue, because I know that you're from Missouri, and so HW, and I not with the greatest amount of respect, Bush Senior, HW, however we want to frame it, is he knew a friend of mine. His name is Johnny Morris, another prominent Missourian.
Oh.
And
Yes.
so one of my favorite photos that Johnny has is a picture of him fishing in a like Bass Boat One, basically, which is the presidential bass boat, and it's in the museum in Springfield, or in the aquarium / the history, or he's got a fishing museum and an aquarium right there, and he's got this big picture.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny has so much respect for the man. When I brought it up a couple of years ago, it's like, he absolutely was one of my favorite presidents. Did you ever have a chance to meet him? And he's like, Evan, he was one of my favorite people.
They were great friends. Great friends. President Bush, they had a mutual admiration society. They did a lot of fishing together. But President Bush also loved how much Johnny Morris has done for sports, for conservation. Yeah. One of his favorite things that Johnny Morris has done is to help teach, particularly underprivileged children, the joy of fishing. And they actually brought fishing to a group of people who maybe would have never been able to fish before. And they did this wonderful event at President Bush's library, which is on the campus of Texas A&M. And there's a lake on the library grounds that is stocked with bass. They did it. Oh yeah, so that President Bush could go fishing. So Johnny Morris and President Bush, they bring a lot of these kids together from all over Texas to come fish in this lake. Oh my, so much fun. And they were catching one fish after another. And we invited the press to come take some pictures. And one cameraman came to me and said, there's a Navy SEAL in that lake hooking fish onto those hooks. Because I've never seen so many people catching fish in my life. It was really, really fun. But what a great man. There's a great story from Johnny Morris in the book about and we used not to talk about this story because President Bush was afraid it would make the Secret Service look bad. And that worried him a little bit. But I got permission from the Secret Service to tell this story. So they're fishing in Canada. They're camping out. This is post-presidency. President Bush goes off into the woods to visit Mother Nature. He doesn't come back. So finally, they go looking for him, and he's up to his neck in quicksand.
What? Really?
He's fallen into a quicksand bog. It was already up to his neck. And Johnny tells it's in Johnny's voice. The story in the book is in Johnny's voice. He wrote me an email because I wasn't there, obviously. So I had Johnny tell the story. And Johnny said what was amazing is he was so calm and he was doing what he should do. He was staying very calm, had his arm up flat, but he wasn't flailing, which would have made it worse. And he just very calmly said, I knew you would show up eventually to pull me out of this. But when they came home from Canada, President Bush said to me, if I had died, Jean, this would have made the Secret Service look really bad, that they had lost a former president in the quicksand. And I thought, well, that's not the biggest problem. Right. You would be dead.
Yeah, that's anyway. So how does that, so when a president transitions into kind of the post-presidency, I mean, I guess all presidents are different, but what does that look like in a person's life as far as moving back into, a non-presidential life? And what happens to, individual psychology? I've often thought about that because you go from being the president one day and then the next day you're a voter. Like,
It is amazing. And I definitely had a front row seat. I definitely think it's tougher for presidents who lose re-election, because if you know you're leaving the office, it gives you time to prepare and to adjust. But I even think for them, it has to be jarring. I mean, one day you're a powerful man in the world, period. And the next day you're making your own coffee. And the fun side of this is the Bushes sort of embraced being back in private life. Keep in mind, Evan, for them, it had been 12 years. The 8 years he was Reagan's vice president and the 4 years in the White House. Mrs. Bush gave up her Secret Service protection. Her son made her take it back after 9/11. But she got a car. President Bush bought her a Mercury station wagon, and she went back to driving. They became obsessed with Sam's Club. Their big discovery was Sam's Club. And I went with her a couple of times. I never went with him. They literally would get a flatbed cart and they bought everything in bulk. And I sort of said to them, it's just the two of you. I swear to God, Cheetos floating around the city of Houston, that President Bush would buy this huge thing of Cheetos every other week or so. They just thought Sam's Club was the best thing. He was good friends with Sam.
Yeah, I was going to say, he probably knew Sam Walton, right? They were, because Bonnie talked about Sam all the time, and I'm just putting pieces together. I'm assuming
you're a good puzzle maker. There are things about, I tell a couple stories in the book about a couple of bad cooking incidents. I think they had to order pizza more than once because Mrs. Bush was trying to cook dinner and there was, cooking fiascos. But part of them sort of embraced normalcy. President Bush is watching TV and he keeps seeing commercials for cruises, Princess Line cruises. So he surprises Mrs. Bush, signs them up for one a month after they leave the White House. A month. What? Can you imagine being on a cruise in the Caribbean and you're in your swimsuit or your cover up and you're walking around the boat and here comes George and Barbara Bush? So it's a sort of a funny story. They got mobbed on the ship. The captain eventually insisted they eat dinner in his cabin. Didn't eat dinner. But the funniest story from that trip is President Bush is in the gym. He works out, takes a sauna, comes out of the sauna, stark naked, and there's a man waiting with a camera to take his photo. It's like, you're not in the White House anymore, Mr. President. But I think, and then the sad part, so the happy part of it, you do get sort of some freedom back. He was pretty quiet that first year. It took him some time. I would say he was very introspective. It took him some time to figure out what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. He even wrote a memo to himself. He wrote a memo to himself on board the Love Boat. And that memo's in the book about what the things he wanted to do, the things he didn't want to do. He didn't want to try to cheapen the presidency by making a lot of money. He did give paid speeches, but he didn't want to sit on boards. And then I think he woke up one day, Evan, and decided, I'm back. I'm ready to rock and roll. And both he and Mrs. Bush got very, very busy in philanthropy. Big causes like cancer. Cancer was very important to them. Very active in cancer. He was a big proponent of volunteerism, his Points of Light Foundation. And then, of course, there is now the famous partnership between him and Bill Clinton. There's an entire chapter in the book called The Odd Couple. The two of them raised hundreds of millions of dollars for disaster relief around the world. It was that whole friendship, again, is a great life lesson by example. That just because you disagree with someone politically doesn't mean you can't find common cause, common purpose. They truly became best friends.
Really? I didn't know that. They were that close.
They were that close.
Wow.
They were that close. The last time President Clinton saw President Bush, it would have been the fall of 2018. Mrs. Bush had already passed, and President Clinton came to Kennebunkport to see him. He came in summer, and he could tell President Bush died in November 30th of 2018. I think President Clinton came in September. He came to Maine, and they had a great visit. But President Clinton just completely broke down. I walked him to his car, and he was just sobbing. And he made me promise that he could see him one more time. He said, now he called me Jeannie. Now, Jeannie, when you know the time is near, you've got to call me. I got to see him one more time. It did not happen. And I felt sort of bad about it, but I really don't, because they had such a great last visit that I think it was better that it ended there. They became best friends. And President Bush, there's some great stories in the book about the friendship that are pretty funny. But President Bush, some of his friends sometimes would say to him, they just didn't get it. And later in life, and President Clinton knows that he would say this, and he loved it. He would say to people, well, here's the deal. I'm old. I'm 90 or whatever he was at the time. I'm 88. I ran out of things to say a couple of years ago. When I'm with Bill, I don't have to worry about that because he does all the talking. I love hanging out with him. I don't have to talk. I just listen to him talk. And that's what he used to tell people.
Did he have other friends that were, I would say, from politics, either rivals or from inside, the RNC or international heads of state that he would spend time with that you can talk about?
Definitely John Major, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, and Brian Mulroney, the former Prime Minister of Canada. Very close. And they also went out of their way to come see him whenever they could. I would say in the last 5 years or so, for the Mulroneys, it was easy because they live in Montreal. And we were in Kennebunkport, Maine in the summer. So it was, close, very close. But Prime Minister Major would fly over. I know a couple times he didn't tell the truth. He pretended he had to be in the United States anyway. And I know one time for sure he came just to see him. But the three of them were very good friends. And he was actually good friends with Mikhail Gorbachev.
Really?
But yeah, they were good friends. Mikhail Gorbachev came to President Bush's 80th birthday celebration, which was a huge fundraiser. We actually raised something like $50 million that night for cancer research, for his library, his school. So it was a great fundraising event. But Mikhail Gorbachev came, and the event got so big, Evan, we had to move it to the Astros baseball stadium, Minute Maid Park. I think the poor Astros had to go on like a 2-week road trip. But the owner of Astros, then a wonderful man named Drayton McLean, insisted on giving us Minute Maid Park. There's like 20,000 people at Minute Maid Park. We have this great event planned, lots of great music. The Golden Knights are going to parachute into the stadium. And President Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev are in the Astros locker room having vodka shots, catching up. And the President of the United States, that would be George W. Bush, came to me and said, Jean, wait, let's go. It's time to go. You need to get them out there. It was like 5 minutes to showtime. And I said, Mr. President, I don't feel really comfortable going over there and telling Mikhail Gorbachev and your dad that they can't have any more vodka shots. And we need to go out there. I says, I think you need to go tell them. And he said, I'm the President of the United States. This is not my job. I'm not going to go tell Dad that no, this is your job as his chief of staff. So, Evan, I go over there and I said, Mr. President, You have 20,000 people waiting for you. We need to get ready and you need to come out and take your seats. And of course, Gorbachev's interpreter, a wonderful man named Pavel, interprets this for Mr. Gorbachev, and he goes, right. And I said to Pavel, what did he say? And Pavel looked at me and he said, in so many words, he wants me to tell you to shut up.
Psst. Caleb, did you know with Black Rifle Coffee's Coffee Club subscription, you can get fresh coffee shipped to you every month? What? You don't even have to go to the store. Whoa. You don't even have to leave your bed.
What? Wow. How did you get in here? You might want to go ahead and join the Black Rifle Coffee Club subscription before one of these guys shows up at your place.
And oddly, I'm very proud of that.
Well, not too many people on the planet have been told to shut up by Mikhail Gorbachev, to be fair. So,
exactly. Yeah. You know, I talked about that in another interview, and I got an email from President Reagan's longtime chief of staff, a wonderful woman named Joanne Drake. And she emailed me and says, oh my gosh, Jean, he told me to shut up backstage at Radio City Music Hall. And I emailed her back and I said, I always knew we were soul sisters, Joanne, but this proves it. Anyway, he was very close to Helmut Kohl of Germany, Francois Mitterrand. He had a black belt list of friends. What I love about him, he also counted among his best friends the local lobsterman, Sonny Hutchins in Buckport. You know, he knew everybody from farmer head state to the local lobsterman in Maine and considered them best friends.
Yeah, so there's a couple points here, which is how difficult is it for a person to be the chief of staff for the president of the United States? Like, how difficult is that? Because it seems to me it would be a challenge of challenges. Telling a person that is not used to being told what to do, what they need to do. That seems like a challenge of challenges.
It is. It is. You are so right about that. And, there were a number of times he usually got his own way. There definitely were times I tried to talk him out of something. Right. And I would say, I don't think this is a very good idea. I don't think you should do that. And he always got his own way. He would overrule me completely. And a couple of times he said to me, Evan, it's interesting that you should ask that. He says, when you're the president of the United States, you're constantly told you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. A lot of it's security related, security driven. And he said, I can actually now do more what I want to do that I'm not president. I would have these interesting conversations about sort of the do's or don'ts. So it was challenging because it was my job to say to him, maybe you shouldn't do this. And now I'm trying to think of a great example for you. I'm going to think of one in a minute. But I would advise him, maybe this isn't such a good idea. And a lot of times it was things like he was going to surprise Mrs. Bush something that I knew she would hate. And I would try to talk him out of it. But sometimes it was a public appearance. Sometimes it was the Secret Service and I would team up against him. This is a great example. This isn't a big substantive example, but it's a great example. It is a huge storm is coming into Kennebunkport, and President Bush had already put away his boat, his famous power boat called Fidelity, was already at the pier in downtown Kennebunkport. It was had been docked, but bouncing around in the bay at Walker's Point is a little pontoon boat that he had given the grandkids to use during the summer. And President Bush announces that he's going to take that boat around, as he put it. it would have been about a couple mile drive through the Atlantic to the mouth of the Kennebunk River and then take it upriver and get it docked. Well, the Secret Service came to me and said, no, 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 this is not going to happen. It is too late. He cannot take that boat. He's going to have to risk losing the boat. I said to his name was John, the agent, John McClellan. I said, okay, this is a security issue. I will go with you and we will double team him, but you're going to be with me. So we go to him and John said, Mr. President, I am so sorry, but we cannot allow you to take the boat around. It is too late. And he looked at John, and I agree. I supported him. I agreed with him. He looked at John. He looked at me. It just happened, Evan, to be September 2nd, which is the anniversary of his being shot down. And he looked at the two of us and he said, John, Jean, can't remember what the anniversary was, but let's just say it was 45 years. 45 years ago today, I was shot down over Chichijima. Right. If I can survive that, I can survive this. And off they went. He did take the boat around, and obviously he survived. Right. So but he could be stubborn. But being his chief of staff, I would say if I had one complaint, and it's a minor complaint, it was such a great roller coaster ride. It was exhausting. Yeah. The man had so much energy. He would get to the office at 7:00 in the morning. There's an entire chapter in the book called I Have an Idea. Right. It was the 4 scariest words he would say to me. And there's always, it was always at 7:00 in the morning, Evan. It was never at 10 or 2:00 in the afternoon. He would come in, he would have had a pot of coffee, heard the news, read the news. Jean, I have an idea. And I would be nursing my first cup of coffee. And I would be like, okay, I'm ready. And it would be things like, I'm going to start parachuting. I would like to parachute out of a plane. Okay. I'd take another drink of coffee. Another time it was, I want to go back to Chichijima. I need to go back to Chichijima. Let's figure that out. So it was a lot of fun, but it was a wild roller coaster.
So did he go back to Chichijima?
He went back to Chichijima. He did. It was unbelievable. He went back in 2002. Right. I did go with him. What's ironic, Evan, is our first idea was for the Navy to take him, and they were very interested in doing that. Chichijima, volcanic island in the middle of the South Pacific. Right. It has no airport. The only way to get there is either by helicopter or by a slow boat from Tokyo, like a 33-hour commercial boat. The Navy, it would have been easy for the U.S. Navy to take him because we have a huge fleet in the Pacific, and that would have been easy to do training exercises. But because his son was president, President Bush didn't feel comfortable with that. He just didn't feel comfortable.
Did he feel like it was? Did he feel like it would be exploitive for? Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and he was right. He was right that some people might interpret it. Are the taxpayers paying for this? Even though he would have paid for. But anyway, we canceled that idea. So at the end of the day, it was the Japanese Navy who took him. The Japanese government, the Japanese Navy helicoptered us in. And as President Bush said, how ironic is it that the government that I was bombing and who shot me down while I was bombing them are the ones who took me back. It was an amazing journey. I think he needed closure. It was all about his 2 crew members who died. And one of the things that I messed up on that trip, I'll be honest, we go out on a boat and we go to the exact spot where he was shot down. And there was a CNN documentary crew with us. We took Paula Zahn of CNN at that time. went with us, and President Bush loved her. He allowed CNN to come and do a documentary. There was, of course, the Japanese host. We had people from the American Embassy. His good friend Howard Baker was actually the U.S. ambassador at the time, Secret Service. And we get out there, and he comes to me and he says, I need to be by myself. I need a little time. And I didn't see that coming, Evan, and I should have. I wish I had. So what he did is he got into one of the lifeboats by himself, and he paddled from us and just spent some time in the Pacific Ocean by himself. Wow. And at one point, I said, you know what? We just all need to turn around. Let's not even look at him. Let's just let him be by himself. The Secret Service, of course, are having a complete nervous breakdown. And they put a couple of guys in the water, swimmers in the water. And I said, fine, but stay under the water. I don't want him there. But it's just something he needed to do. And one of the amazing things that happened on that trip is he met a Japanese man who saw him shot down and saw him rescued.
Really?
Yes. He was an author named James Bradley, who wrote the book Flags of Our Fathers about the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. And James was working on a book called Flyboys, about all the pilots shot down over Chichijima. Most of them were caught and executed, and the commander of that island ate their hearts. He was tried for war crimes after the war, and I think he was executed. President Bush liked to tease Mrs. Bush that he was almost an hors d'oeuvre. She never thought that was very funny. But anyway, James Bradley had found this man in all of his research. He was working for the American Embassy because he spoke fluent English. So he arranged for him to come and meet with President Bush. And he was with a group of Japanese sailors on the island that day. They were up high working on something, and they saw the plane go into the water. And they're watching the whole, what happened. I used not to be able to tell this story without crying, but now I can. So a lot of your viewers, a lot of your veteran fans and viewers will know this, that when a man was shot down, what his squadron did is they would circle around the pilot. So if there was a submarine in the area, the submarine could find them. So the planes would circle to mark the pilot in the water. And also the Japanese kept setting out from Chichijima to go pick them up. And President Bush's squadron mates would, of course, strafe them, would fire on them, and they would hustle back to the island. Well, this went on for a couple of hours. Well, his squadron was running out of gas. And so the rule was you had to leave yourself enough gas to get back to the aircraft carrier. So they had to leave him, and they dipped their wings to say, we got to go. So this Japanese man they're watching all this, and they knew what was going on. They knew exactly what that meant when those planes dipped their wings. And so the Japanese set out to pick him up. They're about halfway between shore and President Bush in the water. He was in a life raft, by the way. I think he spent 3 hours in the life raft. And then all of a sudden, out of the water came the USS Finback, plucked him out of the water, and away they go. And so this Japanese man said to President Bush, he eventually got hired by the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo because he spoke fluent English. And in 1980, one of his jobs at the American Embassy in Tokyo was to gather in those days, the news would arrive on a news wire, like the Associated Press news wire. It come over on a wire. And one of his jobs was to gather up all the news wires and get them to whoever in the embassy, the higher ups. And he's reading the news, and Ronald Reagan has picked a man named George Bush to be his vice president. And this Japanese man said he's just sort of reading the article. And then there's the bio of the new vice presidential candidate. And he realized, I saw this man being shot down. Can you imagine?
Yeah, that's incredible.
I saw this. So they had a wonderful conversation. So anyway, it was an incredible trip. There's a lot about it in the book.
So you brought up President Reagan. So I want to touch on President Reagan a little bit, which was the relationship between President Bush and President Reagan. How did he refer to Reagan in the after his administration? So what was his feeling, his interpretation? How did he intellectualize his time as VP and the man Reagan? What were his, as much as you can tell me as far as his, what he thought of Reagan? What did he think of Reagan?
They're very close. It's another great example of two political rivals who became very close. And I would love to talk about Senator Dole after Reagan. They had a hard campaign in 1980 and said some tough things about each other. But sort of in the 11th hour, President Reagan realized that his best VP candidate was George Bush. He was not his first pick. His first pick was President Ford, but that's another whole story. That didn't work out. So he picked George Bush, and what happened is President Bush would just talk about that President Reagan was one of the most genuinely nice people he ever met. That he just thought he was great, that he was so genuine and so kind, and he knew exactly what he wanted to accomplish. He was very good about surrounding himself with good people. One of the smartest things he did, which stunned President Reagan's campaign team, is he asked James Baker to be his chief of staff. James Baker is who ran President Bush's campaign against him in 1980. But it just shows how smart President Reagan was. He saw in James Baker really is one of the smartest people ever. He's an amazing man. I just saw him the other day. He's 91. He's still amazing. He still hunts, by the way. I can't believe it, but he's still a big hunter. But he chose James Baker to be his chief of staff. He also knew that George Bush, his new vice president, had a lot more world experience than he. And he sent President Bush had a very substantive vice presidency. And a lot of it was done very quietly, as it should have been. He didn't try to get a lot of press, but he traveled the world on behalf of Reagan. One of the things, and again, this isn't in my book just covers the post-presidency. There's certainly a lot about this in John Meacham's book, Destiny and Power, but negotiated with Helmut Kohl the Americans want to put, I'm not going to get this right, but some kind of defense weaponry in Germany against the Soviet Union. And it was Vice President Bush who negotiated. The Germans were so opposed to it. But Vice President Bush got it done. So they were very, very close. And I do remember the last time President Bush saw him, he went to California. He diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but in the beginning stages, President Reagan had just put out his statement wrote a letter to America basically saying, I've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So President Bush went to see him, and it was really hard. He knew who he was. He knew who President Bush was. But President Bush said you could tell he wasn't connecting all the dots on that. And it was hard for him because he loved him. He loved him.
In looking back on the Reagan administration from once again, an outsider, I always looked at the kind of the blocking and tackling, like the ops positions of a lot of like really the hard work, the Vice President Bush really took on a lot of hard work as the VP. And that doesn't happen very often, which I thought was pretty interesting because it didn't seem like a lot of VPs were taking on a lot of really hard blocking and tackling and taking on some very significant advanced negotiations, for instance, in Germany. But it did strike me as he was taking on a lot of very big, complex problems. And that told me, I think, from the historical perspective, is that he could handle it. And he also trusted him to not take the limelight away from the presidency, because obviously they need a second term, right?
That's exactly right, Evan. And that was sort of key, is to keep on the down low about all he did. He was teased. One of the things he did that vice presidents tend to do is attend funerals of representing the United States and the Soviet Union. I think 3 Soviet leaders died under Reagan. I think maybe just 2. Andropov, I think maybe just 2. No, Brezhnev, there were 3. There were 3 who died. Brezhnev, Andropov, and someone whose name I can't remember. But President Bush, one of the things, again, not in this book, but is in previous books, is he was the first American to meet Mikhail Gorbachev. And he literally came back from from that funeral and said to President Reagan, he wrote him a memo on board the plane coming home that said, I think this is someone we can deal with. I think this is a man that we can make some progress. And of course, he was right. And as President Bush said, he wrote about in letters and going to all those funerals, he met a lot of future leaders. Not only was he attending the funeral of the leader who just died, he was meeting the incoming leader, and then sometimes the number 2, who eventually would be leader. He made a lot of friends in attending. Secretary Baker teased him, wanted to do a bumper sticker for his suitcase that said, "You die, I fly." Because in 8 years, I guess he attended a record number of funerals. So it's funny, Evan, in The Man I Knew, he actually attended a number of funerals as a former president, sometimes traveling with the current president. For instance, when Rabin of Israel was assassinated, Clinton took all the presidents with him. He went to a couple of funerals with President Clinton. Actually, George W. Bush sent President Clinton and his dad to attend Boris Yeltsin's funeral. I think he went to 4 or 5 funerals, and he always came home. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Didn't they went to Boris Yeltsin's because Clinton and Bush, President Bush and President Clinton went to Boris Yeltsin's, and then Pope John Paul's funeral together.
Pope John Paul II, the funeral. And that story is a lot about their friendship. Right. I'm happy to tell the story if you think
I think we
time.
Do, yeah.
But quickly, I'll go back in a minute. President Bush would come home from those funerals and he would feel guilty. He would say, Gene, I really had a lot of fun. He loved them because they were reunions. Yeah. They were international. Right. He would see everybody. And he said, oh my gosh, I saw this person, that person. And so Pope John Paul II dies, and the president, who was George W. Bush, felt that he was such a giant of a figure on the world stage. He and Laura were going to head up the American delegation. The president was going to the funeral, but he wanted to take all the presidents with him, former presidents with him. Well, President Ford's health was not, he was already in too bad of health. And President Carter had a conflict. President Bush had a conflict too, but he told me, resolve it. And, it was easily resolved. It was a paid speech he was supposed to give. And the minute you call the host group and say, yeah, he needs to go to the Pope's funeral, they totally got it. Actually, Mrs. Bush went and gave the talk in his place. So anyway, President Clinton's chief of staff, they had just become friends. Their friendship was growing. We're pretty good friends. President Clinton's chief of staff, a woman named Laura Graham, called me and said, Jean, President Clinton just had open heart surgery. And his cardiologist says he may not, under any circumstances, go to Rome. And I said, okay. Right. I couldn't figure out why she was calling me. You sort of need to tell the White House that. And she said, well, he's getting ready to call your boss, see what he thinks, to get his opinion on whether he thinks he can go to Rome. And Laura says, President Bush, 41, has got to tell him no.
Right.
And I said, okay. So I go into President Bush's office. I tell him the circumstances. He says, I got this. And sure enough, our receptionist buzzes and says, President Clinton's on line 1 for you, sir. So President Bush picks up the phone. And this is what I hear, Evan. Well, Bill, I think you can go. He says, we're going on Air Force One. They have that great medical unit, doctors, nurses. Maybe George will give you his bed for the flight over so you can lay down. He says, I think you can go. I would like for you to go. It would be fun for you to go. George is going to have all these meetings, bilateral meetings, and you and I can hang out. And so he gets off the phone and he says, great news, he's going. I said, what did you just do? What part of what I said to you did you not get? And he said, I decided if it was okay, you went. So then, as you can imagine, in about 30 seconds, my cell phone rings. And it's Laura Grant. I still remember her exact words. What the hell just happened? And I said, I did my best. But anyway, he went. So they went. And just the funny ending of the story is they land in Rome around midnight and they make the decision. The Pope is lying in state at the Vatican, at St. Peter's. And they make the decision to go to the Vatican to pay their respects to the Pope lying in state. So I'm watching on TV in Houston. And not only am I Catholic, my little brother is a Catholic priest. And I have to tell you, Evan, I'm watching this in Houston. I didn't know they were going to the Vatican. And all of a sudden, in walks the president and Laura Bush, President Bush 41, President Clinton. It was very emotional for me to watch this on TV. What I did not know is they leave St. Peter's. It's 1:00 in the morning. And they'd all ridden, of course, together from the airport. Right. Well, the president and Laura are staying at the ambassador's residence, and President Bush 41 and President Clinton are staying at a hotel.
Like the Holiday Inn.
And the President of the United States says, this is where life could sometimes, this is something you would say to your dad, or I would have said to my dad. President of the United States looks at them and says, Dad, do you all need a ride?
Right.
And they said, oh, no. We have our own motorcade. Right. You go on. And it's President Bush's aide, Tom Frechette, one who told me this story. And the story's in the book in his voice. He says the president sort of looked at them and said again, are you sure I can give you a ride? And Tom Frechette said, you could tell the president really did not want to leave his father and President Clinton at 1:00 in the morning in St. Peter's Square. But they're like, no, go. So off goes the motorcade, the White House motorcade, not a car in sight. When the White House motorcade is gone, it is President Bush, President Clinton, their two aides, and their Secret Service agents, and no cars. So the Secret Service starts scrambling, trying to find out where they do have a motorcade, but where is it? Where the hell is it? FYI, it was out on the street. There wasn't enough room for it to get into St. Peter's Square. So they had to run out there, bring him in. But while they're doing all that, the two presidents are just talking. Another delegation pulls up, gets out of their cars, a little surprised to find George Bush and Bill Clinton in St. Peter's Square at 1:00 in the morning. And so they ask if they can take photos with them. And And they're like, of course, yes, great to meet you. So one of the Secret Service agents sort of sidles over to President Bush and said, Mr. President, this is the Iranian delegation.
Oh, of course. Iranian.
We would like, wait.
Let's go.
We don't have diplomatic relations with them. Get in the car.
Well, Jean, I know I want to be very respectful of your time. I have a couple like quick questions if you got a couple more minutes. I do.
Yes, I do, of course.
Did he have any? I'm going to preface this question because I think I have a sneaking suspicion. So I was watching the, I believe, HBO short documentary following him around and having some interviews about President H.W. Bush. I forget what the name of it was, but I was watching it. I think it might have just been Bush or something like that.
I think 41. I think the documentary is called 41.
And it's been several years since I saw this. So, but when they brought up Ross Perot, I couldn't help but laugh. And I just couldn't help but laugh because I was like, man, you can still feel the heat coming off that name in that interview. It felt like to me.
Yeah, someone the other day asked me, did he blame Ross Perot for losing the election in 1992? And I just said, yes. Yeah. And the interviewer said, well, do you want to expand on that? And I'm like, well, it's, he did not like Ross Perot, Evan. And Ross, Perot got 19% of the vote in 1992. Yeah. And you don't know. What if it made would those 19% votes all gone to 41? Probably.
Yeah, I think there would have been at least 17%.
Voted at all.
Yeah, I think there would have been 17%. I mean, just me looking at it. I mean, because he split the Republican vote. That's what he did.
Yeah, he split the Republican vote. That's exactly right. The same thing happened to Al Gore, quite frankly, in 2000. On a lesser scale, if Ralph Nader was a third-party candidate that year, and I've read some interesting articles about this. Ralph Nader he got like 2% of the vote, but they definitely think Gore would have won Florida if Ralph Nader had not been on the ballot, and that would have given him the election in 2000. So third-party candidates are problematic. Yeah. And you're right. President Bush, one of the things I learned from him, Evan, gosh, that man does not hold a grudge.
Really?
He doesn't. Oh, gosh, in Mrs. Bush, it used to drive Mrs. Bush crazy. Mrs. Bush said to me, I would love to be more like him. But she once said to me, but we should still be mad at that person. I can't remember who she said about. But he didn't hold a grudge, and he could find the good in everybody. And I love that about him. He could find the good in everybody. Ross Perot, he went to his grave still looking for the good.
I thought so. I did. I thought so. It's like, man, if there's one guy that he might actually hold some animus towards till the very end, that might be it. And Jean, it's been a great time. I've loved talking to you about President H.W. Bush. He's truly one of my most I think iconic and one of the guys that I really look for, I think, and consistently look for as far as how do you template your life? How do you look for opportunities to kind of accelerate the way that you're doing your individual life, your professional life? I think there's a lot to be learned just by watching people. And I look forward to reading your book. I haven't read it yet, so I don't.
Well, read the book. And Evan, I hope that, so here's the book. Be sure to read it. It is a template for life. And I hope that none of the people I've talked to in the last 2 weeks, the book came out 2 weeks ago, I hope none of them are watching. This has been such a great conversation because, oh my gosh, you get him. You get him. And I love that. It has been really fun talking to you. And it's not that the others didn't get them, but not like you have. And what you're going to love when you read this book is everything you feel about him and everything you think you know about him is right.
That's interesting. I look forward to it. I really do. I really look forward to reading it. I can't thank you enough because it's been a pleasure. I really wanted to meet him before he passed. Like that was one of my friends works for Bush Jr., for lack of a better, George Bush. And,
43. We call them 41 and 43.
That's so much easier.
That's how you do it.
And I was pushing him so hard. I was like, man, I just want to meet him. Just, this was several years ago, but not like stalker-esque. I was just looking at it from the perspective of, as a guy that, runs a company. I love politics. It's so interesting to me as far as politicians and politics and history and individual influence. And how do you become a better leader? How do you become a better manager? All these different things that I think people like this encompass. And one final question before I take off, because I got a couple minutes here before you leave. The one thing I'm really interested in is the complexities of this and how these guys are putting together, their life, I suppose. Did it bother you when people blatantly misrepresented who the person was in the news, or because obviously the media is all over the place, and they can be so negative and they can be so inaccurate. Did it bother you? Did it bother him when there was just blatant misrepresentation as far as who they were?
It bothered me a lot. And as a former newspaper reporter, I do. God, we got to get back to telling the truth, and to only report on what you know. So it definitely bothered me when they misrepresent him, or talking heads would just say blah 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 blah, and they have no idea what they're talking about. They haven't done their homework. Again, it's one of the reasons why I wrote the book on President Bush. What was so interesting, and I talk about this in the book, it didn't bother him at all when him, about his son. Oh my God. Evan, and I love that George W. Bush was president of the United States for 8 years. It was probably the 8 toughest years of my being chief of staff, because his father took everything personally. If you said one tiny thing against his son, he would sit in my office and cry. And there were a couple of times I sent a message to the White House. The one Andy Card was, and a great friend was 43's chief of staff for like 6 years, I think. So I would reach out to Andy Card and say, could the president call his dad today? And he would. He always would. But oh my gosh, honestly, Evan, the media could report that 41, I think they did report this, was an alien from Mars. And actually, there was one report that Condi Rice, I think, was 41's love child or something. I don't know. There was so much junk, like the National Enquirer. And President Bush would just laugh, or even the mainstream media is like, whatever. But from 2000 to 2008, if there was one negative thing said about George W. Bush or about the governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, the sky was falling. And I would say, turn your TV off. Turn TV off. And, I would hide things from him. I would hide breaking news stories from him. The problem is the man could Google with the best of him. And he said, why didn't you tell me, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, how do you know this happened? How do you know this person said this? Well, I found it on the internet. I'm like, oh.
That's so interesting, because I can totally get that. If like I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm pretty absorbent. I can take whatever, right? But you throw mud at the kids. That's a totally different level. That's very emotional.
That's right. Totally different level.
Totally different level. So I can get that. Jean, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Evan,
it's been my absolute pleasure. It's been one of the things I've really wanted to do the last several years is talk to somebody that's been close to them. And I'll go out and find the book. Where is it? So I would imagine Amazon.
You should be able to find it in any bookstore. You can buy it on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, but it should be in your local bookstore as well. And if the bookstores in Salt Lake City are not carrying it, let me know and call and yell at them.
I'll send somebody out to get it today because I've got a week in Northern Idaho coming up where I'll need something good to read. So I'm going to read.
Okay. All right. Enjoy it.
But I'll have to send you a copy so you can sign me a copy and send it back.
I'll send you a book plate. Send me your email. I'll send you a book plate. But I want to talk to you after you've read the book. Just not on air. Just call me. I would love to talk to you after you read the book.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gina. I appreciate it.
Just you and I. Okay. Thank you, Evan. This was a lot of fun.